Merry morning or magical midnight, my friends. I am Tillie Treadwell, and I have with me two phenomenal guests tonight. I have Seriah and Chris from Where Did the Road Go Radio. How are you tonight, guys?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having us on, Tilly.
Yeah, yeah,
My
same.
pleasure. My pleasure. I know that you've been up to a lot over the years, but could you fill us in on what's been happening more recently, if you'd be so kind?
Who do you want to go first?
Fight it out amongst yourselves.
You can go, Soraya. What's been going on recently?
Oh man, what's been going on with me? I do a lot of things. Um, so yeah, Where Did the Road Go is my main radio show slash podcast slash YouTube, which is investigating the paranormal, but it's also it's I always take the stance that the paranormal is not only not, I think it's the wrong phrase for it,
Mhm.
rare things that people experience and that some people are more sensitive to than others. But when the question, people look at it with a binary of, is the paranormal real? But I mean, we've had experiences that we can see in cultures across all cultures, going back as far as written history goes. And I'm sure further. So it says something's going on. So that's kind of the tack I approach it with. Like, it might not be the things we think it is, but there's definitely something there. And I think because it's so strange to us, we just use cultural camouflage to put over it to get some kind of grasp of it. But in reality, we can't see what it actually is. So a lot of what I really like digging into is how reality works, how we perceive things, the way our brains work, because it does not work the way most people think it works. Um, yeah, things like that. So that's the Where Did the Road Go aspect. And I'm just fascinated by things that are unexplained, like UFOs and ghosts and whatever. And then I do a lot of music stuff. I have a radio show I've been doing almost 30 years called The Last Exit for the Lost. We have a live performance studio. Um, and that ties into how I ended up doing Where Did the Road Go, because I was doing that on radio, and I initially was just going to do Where Did the Road Go as a radio show, like Coast to Coast. Um, yeah, and so I'm working on an autobiography that's going to be multiple parts, that has all my paranormal stuff, but it also has all the other stuff going on around it because it's all interconnected. I'm working on a book of new ways of looking at the paranormal. And Chris went and did a documentary about me.
Yes,
I
he
did.
did.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And uh, going backwards, I recently, we completed a documentary about Soraya and Where Did the Road Go? And it's, a mix of some of the stuff that, he talks about in the autobiography, and then some of his theories that people who've been listening to it for a long time have heard, and, tells a little bit of his personal story and talks about some of the, major people that have influenced his theories that have come onto the show. And I, started working on the project, because I'd become friends with Soraya, and I had been a listener of the show since almost right when it came out, started coming out. And so after having been a listener for a long time, I am a filmmaker by trade. And, I had this weird experimental underground cult film that I'd made that was based on The King in Yellow. And so I asked Soraya if, I've been a listener to the show, and I asked if, I want to come on and talk about it. And he said yes. And it just sort of went from there. And then I did another film a couple of years later with a collaboration with this fellow Bill Darman, who was part of a web series long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, called Mandate 33, that they did sort of a road trip following Weird America. And you can still see those on YouTube if you want. So they went to different places like Lovelock Cave and, Devil's Gate and things like that. And so he and I kind of teamed up, and we made this cult film that involved like Adam Gorightly, if people know him. He's a sort of this conspiracy theorist and writer, and Tim Banal, who does Banal of America and works for Coast to Coast. And so I kept on kind of, I guess, doing this stuff that was sort of in the weird paranormal Fortean space. And yeah, since I was just hanging out with Seriah, at one point I brought my camera and it kind of went from there. And
if I remember right, though, you were going to do a documentary called like The New Fortean.
Oh yeah, we were. So prior to you're right. So prior to the pandemic, me and that guy I was collaborating with, Bill, we were going to do this series or this film that was called like, the New Forteans, or not even the New Forteans, maybe just the Forteans, in the sense of Charles Fort, the original researcher of the paranormal from way back. And we'd interviewed some people like Bill is friends with Lauren Coleman, so we'd interviewed him, and Adam Gorightly and Stephanie Quick and Jerome Clark. And Seriah was going to be somebody that we interviewed too. And the rest of that project didn't really, some of the footage was lost and it sort of fell apart, the other parts of it. But I continued along with my part with Seriah and made it into its own piece. At some point, maybe we'll see the light of those other interviews, but who knows? With weird things happened during the pandemic. But yeah, you're right, Seriah. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Before the pandemic happened, you were going to come up and we were going to get a whole bunch of the people up here together.
Yep, we were going to
do different things with them, because Mike Cleland was up here, and
Mike Cleland, yeah, some of those people from there. Yep, which we still could at some point,
Yeah, not here anymore.
That's true. He's not.
Yeah.
That's how things happen. Yeah. And I will mention that, we're so happy to have the film finished. It's not distributed yet, so it is literally hot off the press. So there are a few, sort of special DVDs and around there and that exist. But yeah, I gotta find a place for people to get it. And I'm also going to see, because I do some stuff in the festival circuit, if we can get it out to festivals so people that aren't in the paranormal scene can get a look at it too.
Yeah, so, I gave a few copies away at Albatwitch in the rainy, muddy end of Albatwitch.
Albatwitch Day, which is a local, a local celebration of a weird, like, mini Bigfoot creature that lives in southern Pennsylvania, supposedly.
Oh,
there's this like festival, so that Tim Renner usually like sells books at, and Seriah came down and I came up, and we hung out.
Oh, that sounds like fun. So do you have any public release date in mind, maybe, or any general goal for the documentary?
Right. So it had sort of a soft screening launch actually, but a year ago at the Strange Realities, there was a rough cut that I showed of it there. But no, the idea would be to have we might have like a full premiere at some point, but I'm going to start sending it off to festivals, and then we'll see. I mean, we might have it streaming sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, the deal that I had previously for some of my previous films with Amazon Prime doesn't exist anymore, so I can't immediately put it up there. So we'll find a place for it, though. I want it to be, my goal is to have it I would like people to see it, because I think Seriah is cool and I think the show's cool, and then maybe we can sell a few DVDs or Blu-rays at some point too. But yeah, it will be widely available at some point in 2024, and people should be able to see it soon.
Do you think that Tubi would like to have it?
They might. I mean, so not to get too into the weeds of streaming services and how those work, but it totally could go on Tubi, absolutely. And there are a bunch of different places it could be, so there's like different tiers of streaming, and oftentimes if you know, if we're doing it, you know, as part of something that we wanted to try to make money off of, it's usually easier to sort of release it yourself than to do it on Tubi. But
Okay.
Tubi might give you more of a audience. You know what I mean? It's sort of the old DIY. Like I come from like a kind of a punk rock music background, and you know, it was always easier. You know, don't give it the label to distribute; just sell it out of your trunk. And that's kind of what it's like if you put it up on Vimeo or YouTube, you know. So you know, we'll figure out the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tubi is certainly an option, and I, you know, there are some things, you know, there's some aggregators that I can use to get it out on different places like that. So yeah, you're right. It and probably will eventually end up that way. I just want to make sure that, you know, maybe make some Seriah some money, and you know, make sure people get as many eyes on it as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Toss him some dollars for his rants and his rambles.
He
I think
deserves it, you know. You
I am
know,
good at,
this
I
is
am good at rambling.
yeah.
yes, you should be paid to be a professional ranter. Oh wait, I
Yeah.
think you might be already.
Yeah.
I don't know if I rant so much as just ramble.
Yeah.
I'll have to look up the differences between those two vocabulary words. I'm drawing a blank right now, but I didn't have my coffee today, so go figure.
I will say it is hard for me, and I'm just to be honest in why I maybe stumble when talking about the business side of filmmaking is that, like, I honestly, I mean, and this is, you know, probably why I'm an underground filmmaker and a film professor is, you know, when I'm making films, I'm not really thinking of what to do with it. Like it's almost like a impulse that I have that I just have to do this, and if there's something that feels right, I just continue it to completion. And you know, I want people to see it, but the like logistics of trying to, you know, monetize or, you know,
Yeah.
work through the and I know the business. I mean, I'm familiar with the business of filmmaking, and I worked in, you know, the media industry for a while, and I just don't care for it. So kind of like, I guess I willfully not willfully ignore it. I painfully, you know, deal with it. But it's when I make stuff, and I don't want to sound too like artsy fartsy, but it really is like
Uh-huh.
it's something that feels inspired to me, and not that that means it's any good, but it feels like something that I'm doing that's part of, you know, the work. And I say that in the big way that, you know, an alchemist or Gurdjieff follower might say it, is that if there's something, you know, I don't know, there's something about it that's I don't want to say mystical, but I think it's something that a lot of musicians and writers and artists, they all certain people share a particular feeling. And film is weird because film is for the most part an art form that's been co-opted into something that's commercial, you know. But I also think it's still like there's still a lot, and I gave actually a little presentation on this at the Strange Realities a couple weeks ago, is that, you know, there's an intrinsic linkage between this idea of cinema, which is sort of recreating reality, and the occult, and it's been sort of tied up from the very beginning of cinema. And so I think there is something that is, for me, and I've talked about this before, ritualistic about doing it. And there's a way that I approach making films, and again, it depends on the subject and the project, that comes very much from these sort of patterns of creative work or intuitive work that are essentially esoteric. You know, they're from the I Ching, or using tarot, or using, you know, even just ideas of the derive. So you're randomly going places, which is what randonautica is now. There are a lot of these artistic practices that were part of like 20th century avant-garde art that are essentially occult ritual practices. And you know, just depends on the vantage point from which you look at them. And so there's a lot of that that I kind of incorporate into the way that I do my work. So yeah, that would be my excuse for why I don't know how to run a business.
I've made a bunch of no budget movies,
Yeah.
including one about my experiences. Mostly they're generally just more comedy, slapstick comedy type of stuff. But yeah, there's something about it. Like I never tried to market any of them. We used to do them on VHS tapes back in the 90s, and things would just fall into place in weird ways. Like they were just supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to say, Chris, too, I see where you're coming from because I'm a very creative person, but don't trust me with the budget or with any type of advertising or anything. And I think that that's kind of common in a way that the creative people are far less able to handle the other side of it and vice versa. It seems like there's kind of a split there that I've noticed, and it drives my husband absolutely bonkers because as creative as I am, like you, I can't advertise to save my life.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. But then too, as far as video or AV as occult or mystical or magical or divine, I also agree because with audiovisual content, there's so much room to pack it full of symbols and
Yeah.
even mystical music and what is it called, binaural beats. There's so much that you can do with it that I think truthfully AV is perhaps, at least in my opinion, the most occult and maybe even the most divine type of artistic expression outside from living that moment to moment, day to day, outside of
Mhm.
performance.
I agree with you that there's a lot that can be packed into sort of in the way that you think of a sigil or a ceremony
Yeah.
or incantation or anything that comes from a space of you know densely packing sort of
Mm-hmm.
symbolism so that you create something that is I don't want to say larger than the sum of its parts, but almost is transformed into something that cannot be expressed through just
Mm-hmm.
words
Mm-hmm.
or just mathematics or something like that. And I think, I mean, maybe cinema or moving images and sound is a I don't want to say that it's um the greatest because who knows what the future may bring in terms of
Oh, yeah.
anything, but I do think that out of all of the media that exists out there, and I would say even more so, this is getting into some uh arguments that people might disagree with. I would say even more so than VR, because there's something about VR that, and in my experience with it so far, it is it doesn't direct your attention in the same way that something that is created like a film or an audiovisual experience does. And that because of the openness of it, it exists more in like a exploratory gamified sense. So I think there's something
Yeah.
there that could be used for other reasons, but in terms of creating like the what people like in cinema, which is I think that densely packed sort of symbolism. I haven't seen that yet, but prove me wrong. I'd love to, and maybe I'm just not looking at the right virtual pieces of media.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that over time it's going to change. And I think
Right.
that AV will move more to the back burner once the technology advances. That's just
Mhm.
my theory. I could be completely wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise, I'm not at all a tech person. It's just my suspicion. I mean, after all, now all of a sudden the society is using what is it, Chat GPT for law. So, I mean, look at how things are going. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know.
that's
The thing that's going to undermine us is not AI taking over, but us relying on AI for the wrong things.
I
yeah.
agree. I agree. It's fascinating though, because I think that even in these maybe heavier, darker times, it's going to give the human spirit the opportunity to shine the brightest. And for me, it's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm having a hard. curious because I'm not sure where it's going to go. I am
Mhm.
very curious. I'm a little nervous. I mean,
Mhm.
from a mundane astrology standpoint, you might know this very well. I think it's between now and like 2030 is a pretty wacky time.
It is.
Uh, and some of it
Yeah.
has to do with technology, like, or the
Yeah.
idea of technology, or Mercury at least. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I've had very dear friends of mine tell me that by the beginning of 2030, it's going to look like a completely different society.
Mm,
And I was told specific checkpoints. So I'm really interested to see that play out.
mm.
I do believe that there was a Roman curse, or you could say FU, that they used to say, which was may you live in interesting times. But
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
that was, I
huh?
think that was a Chinese proverb.
Was it? I
I've
might have pictured that.
Yeah. Yes, I know that one. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was Chinese. It might have
Was
been
it?
yeah, yeah. May you live in interesting times. It was a curse, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's
I
true.
think,
No, you're right. That's appropriate.
yeah. And I think that even in the worst of times, there are beautiful opportunities. I think that it all just kind of depends on someone's perspective. But I don't think that we're really here having this experience truly anyways. I think that it's all temporary and that we're just having whatever animal experience here in the densest reality before we go back to where we came from, or we go up higher and higher in vibration after death. So for me,
Mhm.
I don't know. I look at it as though I kind of, seeing babies born here, I feel kind of sad, but for me, it's more of a celebration when people do pass and they go home, at least in my interpretation.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I find Earth to be such a curious place.
Do you believe, if you don't mind me asking, in reincarnation of a sort?
I do. I
Yeah.
do. And I believe that all of the species, quote unquote, I think that we're all family. And I
Hmm.
think that it's not nearly as cut and dry as what people, well, typically human people seem to think, like that humans are separate from, for the most part, aliens and fairies and shadow people and all of that. I think that we're all one big family with just
Yeah.
different densities and genetics and different psychological profiles for the most part. But so, for example, there's the Russian Domovoy. Are you familiar?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. So yeah, they were said to be the ancestors of the human people who had passed on, and they come
Right.
back to live in the
Right.
hearth and guard. And then there are all the fairy tales of people like Soraya, we were talking about earlier, near-death experiences, changing people, and people coming back in different ways. So I just find this place to be intriguing, utterly intriguing.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about near death experiences is, if you're brain dead for 5 minutes, you shouldn't come back with a higher IQ.
Right.
You shouldn't come back with a better outlook on life, and that tends to be what happens. If someone's an atheist, they tend to be more spiritual. If they're religious, they tend to go toward spirituality more. Um, it's if you're if all it is lack of blood to the brain, you should be having problems, not improvements.
Yeah.
Right.
Who was
Yeah.
it? There was one guy who came back and all of a sudden he was able to speak like five different languages, including a dead language, and play the piano
Hmm.
on a genius level. How does that happen
Hmm.
if it's just a biological matter of tissue dying? I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know.
There's a famous case of a woman in France, I believe it is. She died of very severe cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And when she got to the other side, they said, "Do you want to go back?" And she's like, "Well, I can't."
Mm-hmm.
Like my body's done. And they're like, "No, we can
Yeah.
fix it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
sent her back, and she was completely cancer free.
Yeah.
And the doctors are like, "Well, we must have been wrong about the cancer." And there's no
Yeah.
way they were wrong about the cancer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Funny enough, I had my own experience with that as well that I talk about sometimes, where it was just this past April. Did I tell you about this, Soraya?
I don't know.
Okay. I'm still recovering from a pretty severe illness and whatnot. But in April, I was very sick, and I didn't realize quite how sick
Oh,
I
yes, you
was.
did.
Huh?
Mm.
Yes, you did, but go on.
Did I, Chris? Did I explain this to you?
I
No.
mean, I think I heard a little bit of this, but no, I go on, please. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the same as that lady that Soraya was just talking about, I had the
Yeah.
same exact experience. But I was met with this woman who, hi honey, hubby's home, who she took me into essentially like a giant black velvet room, and she had the most beautiful voice I've ever heard, and she was singing in perfect harmony with what I call guitar music, but that's just because I have no other word for it. But it
Mm.
was the most beautiful music, the most beautiful voice I've ever heard. And essentially, she gave me the choice to come back here or not. And I chose to come back because she explained that I would be completely healed by next spring, that it would just be rough if I could hold on until then.
Mm.
But she and the other people who were waiting right outside of that velvet black room said that they would heal the damage that had been done to my body and give me a really good head start. And now
Yeah.
here I am, having had that experience and healing. So I completely agree, and I believe entirely that other lady's experience.
How how did you enter the experience with the woman in the black velvet room? Was this did it happen during in between sleep time, or was it in the middle of the day, or?
Sure. So this was actually in the middle of the day. I was
Mhm.
not feeling well at all, and I just thought that I needed to go sleep for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I went to take a nap.
Yeah.
And I thought that I was asleep when this started to
Yeah.
happen, but thinking back, I really don't know.
No,
It was
sure.
like 1 second I was there in my body, just trying to rest and take it easy. But then the next, I was like outside of myself. I felt like I
Hmm.
was up higher, but I don't actually know if that is true. But
Sure.
it was incredible. It was
Yeah.
absolutely incredible. And I was sad to come back here, truth be told, because I was offered to go with her and learn a lot more about life. But
And was your, it sounds to me, so if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but it sounds to me like this was one of those experiences where people have where they call it like a seamless or a seamless flow of consciousness. I mean, I'm thinking the wrong word, but anyway, where like you know how when you dream, like your consciousness, it's like a different filter sometimes, or at least for me, there's a
okay,
different way. And when people are having experiences sometimes that don't go through like the sleep cycle, that your consciousness, like when you say you just lay down and all of a sudden you were there, your consciousness there was, it was seamless.
it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
it absolutely was. It was, come to think of it, I don't remember there being any actual transition, if
Right.
that
It's
makes
just,
sense.
yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I think that death is a lot more positive and interesting than most people think. You
Well,
know?
I think what death is, we're already there. It's just a part of us projecting here.
Hmm.
And when we stop existing here, we're still existing there. It's
Yeah.
why I like
Yeah.
the video game analogy. You're playing a video game, and that avatar in the game is you, but it's not really you. You're the you playing the game through the avatar. So when
Yep.
your game ends, you're still you. You're still, nothing has really changed other than your experience from playing the game.
And from the where the language for that the term avatar came from, that is essentially the idea for how, or kind of like the mechanics of how things function, is that we have this body that we're in, which is the gross body, and by gross, I guess
Hmm.
it means like rough, or in some ways you could say it's like, lower vibrations or density, but gross is the term that was used, when I was studying it. And then at the same time, you have existing in the same space, your subtle body, which is your energetic body, but you're just, for most people, you're just not conscious of it. It's just your consciousness is focused in the same way that, like, a television or a radio receives something. Like, you are placed here, and there's some people in the world that aren't, but most people are. And that, so you have this energetic body, your subtle body, and then in between that, you also have this astral body, which is like your connection between your subtle body and your gross body. And then you have the mental body, which is most, if you were to see it, it would be more like a sphere, like a glowing sphere. And in, I guess, higher vibrations, you start to see it almost like a halo. And that is essentially what could be known as the causal body. So it is where, like, everything at the seed body, where all your, the thoughts and sort of the matrix that makes up your individual ego sort of exists within that seed body. And that these are all existing in the same time, sort of same space, place. It's just we're conscious of only this one plane of existence that we're on right now. So that when you die, you really are just shifting. You're kind of like letting go of a cocoon, or a temporary vehicle, and your consciousness goes, and it's sitting in the subtle body in between lives. Now, this is, of course, a cosmology that one may or may not agree with, but it's the sort of mechanics of it, I think, are interesting to ponder, because it's a very ancient way of looking at it, but it has applications that I think are interesting nowadays too.
I agree with you. And to add to that, I think that the denser someone's genetics are, so the more, say, human someone is, or the more neurotypically normal a human person is, I do believe that that means that the brain filter is much stronger here, and they're more fit for survival and to handle everything that goes here on Earth. But then we have people who are born, you could say, energetic empaths, and sometimes that does overlap in my understanding with neurodivergence and autism. And those people tend to have more experiences with what typically human people call, the other side. And really, I think that the brain, because it is wired differently, and I think because that these people carry a lighter vibration by default, that they're able to live in both worlds and
Sure.
collaborate both. So that's my working theory. That's my own personal experience as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that it meshes perfectly with what you're saying. And I think that there's a reason why what you're saying has been around for so very long.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's a good way of putting it. I think is that the brain, or the like the gross body is not. It's it's like you're kind of in between stations somehow. Yeah, I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, yes. And something else that I found is that the more human and dense a person is, the more of an ego, one developed ego they have.
Hmm.
But getting into the trickster stuff that we were talking about, I've noticed that say like the fairy people or the other types of peoples, the trickster peoples, many of them are said to have several identities and egos over the eons. And I think that that's because that is their natural psychology. And to me, I think that that's normal elsewhere because it's up higher, closer to God, quote unquote God, which I believe that creativity is at the heart of God. And therefore, everything else I think is far more creative and has several egos per person, kind of like a kaleidoscope.
Hmm.
Whereas humans have a really unique experience, in my opinion, where typically they live one story, one life at a time as far as their brain
Right.
registers. They have that
Right.
that denser filter. And I think that that's really cool if it's true that there are several types of ways to exist in the quantum and down lower here. So I don't know. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
No, that's neat. The way you talk about it, it makes sense to me, even if we're using different sort of terminology. Again, I think that a lot of times some of these, concepts and ideas, particularly when you get into kind of like the deep mystical end of it, the reason why there have been so many different names over the course of history is because it's hard to pin it down, and it's not necessarily something that like there are paradoxes, and there are things that like you said, have more than one identity that are existing simultaneously, so it can be really difficult to sort of use our very empirical, parsed out way of language that we have, which is based mostly, and I think, well, I don't know, I feel like a lot of us think and talk in a way that is based upon written language rather than maybe how it was done prior to written language. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Seriah, do you have anything to add?
I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry about that. Yeah.
language,
Language.
language is something that, were you on the no, I haven't done did I do a show with you recently, Chris? Yeah, I did. Well, yeah, I did the one with you and Tillie.
Yeah.
So the idea of the written language affecting how we actually understand things is interesting. Because oral tradition forced us to memorize these things, whereas now we can write them down. We don't actually have to know them. We can look them up. And now we've taken that a step further with the internet, where you don't even like have to refer to a book. You can just ask a box in your hand and it will give you information that may or may not be correct. And it deludes our ability possibly to really think about this stuff because we're not learning it. We're just relying on the information to be there. And I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I think like a lot of things with the internet, it's both, because you have all this information at your fingertips. But yeah, I think a lot of people just rely on the fact that they have that information on their fingertips and don't actually deep dive into learning things that maybe they should. And I do think there are different parts to us as far as what we are. I think what's here is a fraction, but I think here there are bits. There's like the ego self, and then there's the higher self, and possibly other aspects of what we are. Some of which may die when we die. The body self may have a sense of consciousness that does die when we die. Whereas other things move off. You could have the shell that sticks around as a ghost. It's not necessarily the higher self that's attached to it anymore, but just a manifestation of the ego of the person that was here that hasn't dissipated for whatever reason. And it may be the higher self. It's hard to say. I mean, these are all just concepts that we use to try and make sense of things that we can't quite directly understand.
When I was doing paranormal investigations and the paranormal counseling services, I did run into, I think it was 2 or 3 cases where it genuinely seemed to me that there was a human spirit lingering around.
Right.
But I can't say for sure if that was the case, even though when I worked with the family to resolve whatever unfinished business was going on that the person was apparently upset with before death, that solved the paranormal activity. But I have no way of knowing if they had accidentally created like a tulpa
Right.
because of the upset feelings, or if it was the real spirit of the person there. All I know is that it was there, and whatever it was, and it helped forward some type of storyline, and that's really all I know.
And that one of the things I'm working on that the one book I'm working on is all the different ways you can look at this stuff. Like, everyone's looking for that universal solution that this explains everything. And
Yeah.
there are a few ideas that do kind of work, like the simulation theory, like Patrick Harper's stuff with the imaginal realm, because it incorporates everything. It doesn't so much explain everything, but it allows everything to exist that fits into the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it doesn't explain the bigger holographic theory, same thing. I mean, it allows all this paranormal stuff to work. It doesn't necessarily explain what reality is beyond, say, being a hologram or a simulation or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's not all and nothing, if those aren't both the answers at the same time. Because what if it varies per person? And what if each person who incarnates projects their own desired reality? And because of the liquid nature of reality overall, what if everyone and no one is right at the same time
Yep.
because everything is different per person?
Right.
That's
Right.
sure.
And if you add animism into that too, then like
Yeah,
it's a whole mess because everything's
yeah,
got a spirit then, and we're
yeah,
just all competing.
yeah,
None of us are experiencing the same reality.
Right.
correct.
You know, there are even if we have an agreed on consensus reality, we're not experiencing the same reality. We don't see, even twins do not see things the same way, because they are affected by different elements in their environment, their experience, their memory, the way they experience things. Um, we don't, when we have an experience, it's not like you're not like you're watching a movie where you can just go back and replay it. I mean, the memory of that experience is going to be made up of elements of what actually happened, elements of how you interpreted what happened, elements of your emotional state when it happened, your perspective on it, things that your brain filled in that you
Hmm.
didn't actually see, but you assumed needed to be there, things like that. So it adds a lot to the, it's hard to say that someone's directly right or wrong. Two people can experience the same thing, and both of them could have had a different version of the experience, but it doesn't mean that that one of them's wrong.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And that was a major part of my paranormal counseling, was helping people come to grips with the fact that, or the possible fact that, both parties could be right and or wrong at any given moment, and that reality around them too may be changing at any given moment.
Yeah.
So does it really matter? I mean, I would try to work people away from arguing more into
Yeah.
just accepting reality for what it seems to be in the moment, and then how can we move on healthfully and happily with what it seems to be from there.
Well,
Yeah.
also a lot of times when people will fight about things, it's not really the thing they're fighting about. They're upset about something else. And they've just, focused in on some small, insignificant thing uh,
Yeah.
to take it out on.
Yeah.
And that used to strip away a lot of those petty arguments, and then we get into the emotional stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like, it never ceases to be less sad to me than to watch a full grown man cry. But sometimes gotta get that out, I think, in order to move forward in a happier and healthier way.
Mm-hmm. Everybody can cry. It's all right.
Yeah. It's just interesting how something can go from paranormal to psychological that
Oh,
quickly.
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
mean, it's the emotional states that often will. I mean, so I always approach this stuff from the scientific aspect of, okay, of all this stuff,
Mhm.
we can prove psi is a real thing. Whether or
Mhm.
not skeptics want to admit it or not, the scientific evidence for psychokinesis, psychic ability, stuff like that is significant. There's more evidence for that than a lot of things like dark matter and things like that they fully accept, even though they don't have any evidence for it.
Yeah.
So we have all these psi experiments that tell without a doubt that there's something significant going on. So if you start with that, and then move out from there, that's saying that we can generate this energy, we can affect objects with our mind, we can sometimes, pick up things that are going to happen in the future, or read information off of objects.
Mhm.
When you look at all that, you Yeah, I kind of forgot where I was headed with this.
Uh-huh.
You have an easier path of then applying that to other things.
Right. Yeah.
So with psychic stuff, PK stuff, so like poltergeists. Okay, well, someone can believe a poltergeist is a spirit, and maybe spirits have something to do with it in some cases, but we can say from a scientific viewpoint that psychokinesis is real. So it's entirely feasible that psychokinetic energy is being put out by people. Uh, the other thing is that emotion strengthens this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
if somebody
Yeah.
is stressed out,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody is hurting inside, traumatized, whatever, they're generating more PK energy and thus are more likely to either draw things to them that can use that energy or manifest in some way from themselves something that seems like an external force but isn't.
Yeah. I ran into a lot of cases exactly like that where it was either the person's own extreme emotional state causing parasites to come forth, or they were blowing out electronics and whatnot because their electronic field, in my experience, was just that out of whack due to the trauma and the emotions and whatnot. And I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you, Sarai, what do you think about the idea that there are some people who go out and they summon UFOs, but they're actually creating them with their own mind's
Oh,
desires?
yes,
What do you
certainly.
think about that?
Because I don't think UFOs are extraterrestrial to begin with.
Okay.
I think we're dealing with another form of consciousness that is probably right here alongside of us. And I think when people are doing that, I mean, it kind of depends. I mean, you got like Stephen Greer going out there and doing that, and yeah, these practices work, but he'll use anything in the sky as a legitimate unknown when it's not.
Right.
But that's a money making thing for him. With regular people, yeah, it's magic is what you're doing. You're practicing magic, and you're summoning UFOs with magic. These are magical practices. And it's because these things are not flesh and blood aliens, but some aspect of something deeper that also interconnects with the stuff we interact with when we're doing things like magic.
Yeah.
That's my working theory as well. Although I do believe that sometimes there are less physical people who do pose as the UFOs in order to um, have a connection that they would mm, like to build with humankind for whatever reason, or because they're getting food energy off of whoever's trying to summon. It's so hard to tell whether it's someone creating tulpas in the sky or there's some trickster element to it. So I don't encourage people to go out and do that kind of stuff just because there's no way really to know in my opinion and experience. So I was just curious about how you thought about that.
I, I,
What
I
about
feel I feel it's really important not to marry yourself to any particular theory or idea of
Mm-hmm.
what your experiences are,
Mhm.
um, because that limits things, and I think it pushes those things to appear more like that.
I agree.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I had I could get into one of my weird experiences if you want. That's a good example.
Yeah, please. I'm very curious.
So this I didn't realize, but actually happened along with a whole bunch of other experiences in a very short period of time. But there is a psychiatric institution that used to be here. It's a very old one, and they had a potter's field for the patients who didn't have families.
Mhm.
So when I was a teenager, we used to go up there just to hang out because it was a cliff that overlooked Seneca Lake. And we even built like a bench to sit on the edge of the cliff and stuff. So we could just go up there whenever and just, if we had nowhere else to go, we could hang out in this really nice scenic area.
Mhm.
Um, and one day we had built a second section, a distance away from the first, and it was there was a tree in front of it between us and the field where you couldn't see the other side of the tree. You couldn't see the field from where we were. And there were three of us sitting there, and all of a sudden the tree starts shaking, and we're hearing a loud thunk, and we could feel it in the ground, like a thunk against the ground. And I thought it was a large deer, like a buck, running its horns against the tree. And I was like, "Oh, that's not good." And my one friend starts freaking out. And he's like, what is that? I'm like, I think it's a deer. And I'm like, because I'm thinking, where are we going to go? Is it just a cliff here? We literally have to drop down the cliff to get away from it, if that even worked. And so
Mhm.
I walked down the trail a bit so I could see the other side of the tree, and there's nothing there, and it stops.
Mm.
So I'm like, huh. And he's like, what is it? I'm like, I don't know.